Good afternoon. This is Dr. Thomas Klein. I'm coming to you again from Raleigh, North Carolina, representing the National Pain Council and JATH, J-A-T-H, Educational Consortium. Before we get started, I wanted to show you a little method that I use to keep keep track of things. And anybody can do this. You can keep track of anything that you have multiple projects on. So what I do is I have playing cards that have a plain background, and I just write on here the name of the project. This one is Redemption. It's the stories of people who were taken off and then put back on their medicines. So then these little tags are who's working on it, and then as it progresses I can move it along, and so these mean they're more ready to finalize. These are in early editing, and this thing that they're in is called a card holder for playing cards. And there's a whole bunch of different shapes. And so I just wanted to share that with you as a method to keep things organized, because I'm not an organized person, and it's difficult for me to keep track of everything. So this is a little handy way to do that. So today we're going to talk about lawsuits. You read every day about lawsuits. This particular story is Walmart, CVS, Walgreens are ordered to pay $650 million over opioid sales. So what's going on? What it is the assumption, we're going to talk about this later, the assumption that if you put too many opioid pills out there, you're going to create more addiction. Turns out that's not true. We've discussed previously the fact that there's a genetic gate that keeps people from becoming addicted. But this is about greed. So what happens is that these are all pharmacies. Supposedly, by selling opiates, they've contributed to the opioid crisis of what? Addiction? No, addiction's not been increasing. Overdose deaths, those are pretty much all heroin. There's been a lot of studies to show that prescription medicines really have nothing to do with the opioid crisis. But these lawyers, you see, they can become billionaires. So what they do is they get a whole bunch of people, like towns across the country, to sue these, and then they sue all these pharmacies and say, you contributed to the opioid crisis, and we're going to prove it, and we want $650 million, and then they are going to divide it up. So they really don't have a case, because you cannot addict the majority of people on opiates. You certainly can with methamphetamine and cocaine and Adderall and ecstasy. Those are all stimulants, and those stimulants cause addiction, and they are directly related to the amount of substance in the area. Not true for opiate addiction. So this same thing happened with Johnson & Johnson. The people testifying for the defendants seem to be far and few between. Another story about that. But Johnson & Johnson also, it was a judge trial, no jury, awarded $600 or $700 million to the 400 people that were suing. If a company is sued by 400 people, or 300 people, or 200 people, it costs so much money to defend each one, because each one is a lawsuit. You can't ignore them. So they figure that they'll get a settlement of $650 million. They'll divide it up over 20 years and pay out this money to all the towns. And like in North Carolina, they got, several $1 million to take care of the opioid crisis they supposedly created. This is the same problem with Jack Daniels creating alcoholism. It's no different. But the trick this time was to get a lot of people suing big pocket companies. Walmart, CVS, Walgreens, these are not little pharmacies. So in Oklahoma, J&J, $600 million was reversed in the state court. The Supreme Court said, wait a minute, I agree that you came up with this, but you did so in error. This was the trial that Andrew Kolodny was paid $500,000 to testify. There was really no opposition. And the reason there was no opposition is because those lawsuits, those 300 or 400 lawsuits, they also sued all the doctors in the country who were outspoken and experts on opiate treatment. So they all got notices of 400 lawsuits. And so guess what? They were all ruined, and they never came to J&J to testify. Only Dr. Kolodny. So that's the story on the lawsuits. They are not valid. These companies, and they're suing distributors too. So they sue the manufacturers, they sue the distributors, they sue the pharmacies, as in this case. That's a lot of money they're likely to get their hands on. And everybody feels guilty about opioids. But the key factor is you cannot addict 99.8% of people, no matter whether you give them IV heroin or you give them OxyContin, which is just long-acting oxycodone. It doesn't matter what you give them. They will not addict, period. So these lawsuits were about nothing. But a lot of people got rich. Now the states are getting the money because they don't really understand addiction, and the fact there's two kinds. There's opioid addiction, which is a brain disease, and then there's a psychosocial addiction to methamphetamine and cocaine. They need different treatments. So they don't know what to do with the money. I just read that in North Carolina, they have the usual, boilerplate. Oh, we're going to work on prevention. How do you work on prevention? It's a genetic disease. You can't prevent it. But you can certainly warn people that if they suddenly go to the moon on their very first pill, they've got opioid addiction. But they don't know that. We're publishing it, so hopefully they'll read it, but nobody wants it because it's an inconvenient truth. So when you read about lawsuits, understand that these pharmacies and distributors and manufacturers are not guilty of anything. Thank you, and good night.